What I have found in the files may change the entire world's perspective about the death of Aaron Swartz. Now, some of you may already recognize who Aaron Swartz is, but if you're like me, I had no idea who he was until I found his name in the files. So Aaron Swartz is most famously known as one of the co-founders of Reddit, as well as what they call a hacktivist. And in 2013, he unalived himself just 3 months before his federal trial was set to start. Aaron was basically a child prodigy who bounced around from Ivy League to Ivy League but was just too smart for school. He was a huge activist for free and fair internet. He fully believed that federally funded documents should be free to the public. You know, because why should we pay money for things that we are already funding? So after Reddit was sold in 2006, Swartz became much more heavily involved in activism, helping launch the Progressive Change Committee. In 2009, he actually spent time working as an intern for congressional offices of Democrat Alan Grayson. According to his friend Ben Winkler, this was because he wanted to learn about how the government operated before he set about the business of trying to improve it. Now, why he ended up interning at a Florida congressman's office, I don't know. I mentioned this because as part of the buyout deal for Reddit, he was required to work at Wired magazine, but soon left this job that was based in San Francisco to go back to Massachusetts, feeling more at home in Cambridge's hacker community. In 2010, he became a research fellow at Harvard University in the Safra Research Lab on institutional corruption. Now, in 2008, Aaron downloaded almost 3 million documents that were stored in Pacer. Pacer is a database where they keep all the federal documents, all the federal court documents, etc., and they charge about 8 cents a page for you to get a hold of this stuff. He released all this information to public.resource.org, and it was basically shut down by the government so that they could investigate the legality of what he did. But after 2 months, no charges were filed because, yes, those documents are technically free to the public. That same year, Aaron founded a website called watchdog.net to accumulate data all in one place about politicians. And in December of 2010, Aaron released his Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto calling for all paywalls of publicly available information to be dissolved. Now, the official story in the media is that in September of 2010, Aaron broke into MIT's closet twice, bypassed the MIT server walls, and downloaded millions of documents that were academic journals stored through a program called JSTOR, which is a subscription-based program that is only available through academic research lab like students, etc. And since he was a research fellow at Harvard, he had a JSTOR himself. Now, on January 6, 2011, Aaron was arrested by the MIT police, and he was arrested on breaking and entering charges, even though he just walked into an open closet, as you saw. But the MIT police force was not the only ones that showed up for his arrest, because they were accompanied by a Secret Service agent. In July of 2011, he was indicted by a grand jury on charges of wire fraud, computer fraud, and unlawfully obtaining information from a protected computer and recklessly damaging a protected computer. So I had to ask myself, what exactly is a protected computer and why is the Secret Service involved in this? According to the law that he was indicted for, a protected computer is exclusively for the use of a financial institution or the United States government, or essentially just used by the government or financial institution. Which makes me raise some eyebrows because did he hack into MIT's computer system or something the government is using? Now, the official story is that the government went on this fervent campaign to try and make an example out of him, and he was facing up to $1 million in fines as well as 35 years in prison. And the pressure of the case was just getting to him, and he was running out of money, and so when his girlfriend came home from work one day, she found that he had Now, reportedly, Aaron did suffer from depression. His death led to something called Aaron's Law, which was a reform of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that he was charged with, aiming to prevent overzealous prosecution for violating website terms of service. Here's my thing with this case. A whole bunch of charges ended up being dropped, including the state cases of breaking and entering, etc. He also returned all of the academic journals that he had taken, and the federal prosecutors gave him an offer of 6 months. His law team turned that down and had a counteroffer that did not include jail time, and the government turned down that offer. 2 days later, he unalived himself. So that makes zero sense to me. So then I started looking harder at the court documents involved in his case. Now, Swartz died on January 11th, 2013. And according to this official court document, 2 weeks later, he was supposed to have a significant suppression hearing. Because apparently when he was arrested, they seized all of his computer equipment without a warrant. Secret Service claims they never possessed his laptop at all, and that the Cambridge Police Department had a hold of it. In fact, it was 39 days before anybody obtained a search warrant. A month before his death, his lawyers asked for a suppression hearing in front of the judge for this exact reason. Now just buckle up, guys, because these motions to suppress came a year after his arrest. I would have thought any attorney worth their salt would have done that immediately. But no, it wasn't until a month after Aaron Swartz got new lawyers. And the way my heart dropped out of my butt when I saw who his original lawyer was. Marty effing Weinberg, Epstein's lawyer of 20 effing years. So immediately I run to the files to see if anything was in there about Aaron Swartz, and there was only one thing of importance. This email to Jeffrey from Joy Ito 8 months after the death of Aaron with the subject line, and then there was this recently, ... Link. It says, Jewish hero Aaron Swartz exposing elite. Excuse me? Now, Joy Ito was an entrepreneur and venture capitalist who actually took over as director of the MIT Media Lab in 2011. He was announced in April of 2011, just months after Aaron was arrested. People called the appointment an unusual choice because this man has no degrees. Joy Ito is in the files a hell of a lot. Like, I put him in the top 10, top 20 people that Jeffrey talked to. And whatever their conversations were about, even Ito was like, do you have Signal? Let's talk on there. And that was in 2017, long before I heard of Signal. Now, when I tried to put that link in the Wayback Machine, I got a message that I've never seen before, saying that the URL has been excluded from the Wayback Machine. Now, it took me a good long while, but I was able to find it. And are you ready for this? Are you ready for this? January 16th, 2013, so 5 days after Aaron was found dead in his Brooklyn apartment, this blog posted, Jewish hero Aaron Swartz, exposing elite child abuse. This blog references an op-ed written by the former editor of Japan Times Weekly titled, Was Aaron Swartz unalived by a Massachusetts Institute of Technology satanic child ring? Yeah, folks. Now here's the article. They tried to scrub that too, but I found it. It's really long and it goes into a lot more detail, but basically this person spent about 2 years working with a anti-trafficking ring, and it claims that Swartz was a risk to the people at MIT who produced child for a clientele that includes the highest echelon of the State Department, major corporations, intelligence agencies, the military brass, and the White House. I have taken the last few days to research every single part of these claims. They also named Nicholas Negropont, who was the person who founded Media Labs at MIT. They also talk about Frank Moss, who was the person who was running the lab when Aaron did his thing, as well as claiming that Joy Ito ran a nightclub in Tokyo's district, which was run by a Yakuza boss, connecting it back to MK Ultra, claiming they were using it on children to make slaves for the elite. And trust me, I've gone deep into this. I've found articles that have been scrubbed from the internet. I've connected it back to the State Department, the Secret Service agent that we've talked about. I've even dug into the background of his girlfriend and found out that she has a very suspicious familial connection. At his own funeral, his father got up there and said that Aaron was killed by the government, which has been spun to be metaphorical. Also, if you want to support my work, go to my bio. My dog's medicine is about to run out and I'm starting to run low on funds. So yesterday I showed you all this email from Joy Ito, who was the head of MIT's Media Lab, to Jeffrey Epstein with the subject line, and then there was this recently, ... with a link to this blog, which was dated January 16th, 2013, so just 5 days after Aaron's death, claimed that Aaron was actually trying to expose an elite child abuse ring. And this journalist wrote an article saying, was Aaron Swartz by an MIT satanic child ring. Now, this blog only took parts of it, and I swear we're going to get to all of it. And I've been spending the last week going through all of these claims. And while some of the information has clearly been scrubbed from the internet, I have been able to find traces of this information verified, but I've also found traces of this information mentioned in the files, as well as intersecting with a lot of my own research over the last 7 months. And I'm really not trying to gatekeep this information. That's why I'm showing you all this in the background now, so that you can pause and read this yourself, because I'm not going to talk about it yet today. Now, there's a lot more information in both that blog and the article that it was referencing, but I just wanted to give you guys a feel of what was in that article. Because last night, I decided to scour the date in which that blog was sent to Jeffrey so that I could see if there was context for it. And I found it. Jeffrey, Woody Allen, his wife, and Eva Dubbin were all planning a trip together to go to MIT Labs. Joy Ito wrote to Jeffrey, I was just thinking about the two of you coming to the labs during the open house. The risk that I realized that we have is that everyone will recognize as Woody, and someone might take a picture of you guys. Since you two were just in the news recently, I wonder if that might be bad. The main fear that I have is that in addition to my 150 students, I have 400 random sponsors walking around during the open house, and I can't really control them very well. What do you think, Joy? And then that's when, an hour later, he sent Jeffrey, and then there was this recently. Now, I went through all of Jeffrey's messages from that day and the day after, and he never responded to any of this, at least not that we were seeing. So the context of this email was in the middle of a serious discussion about Jeffrey and Woody Allen. And I've read through enough of Jeffrey's emails that if he doesn't respond to something, it's because he doesn't want a paper trail. Especially when earlier that day, Joy and Jeffrey were talking about directions as to MIT publicity concerns, and they specifically got on the phone to chat about it. I've read about 700 documents related to Aaron's case, and I can tell you confidently that what the media was being told about this case was not what was actually happening. Not only that, I truly believe that Aaron was going to get off. First off, Aaron went and downloaded these files from MIT several times. Y'all will have to forgive me if I get something techie wrong, because it's not really where my brain goes. But from what I can tell, twice in all of these time periods, he actually hacked into MIT's computers, not just where the journals are stored. Because the question people don't seem to ask themselves is, why did Aaron go to MIT specifically to do this? He was a research fellow at Harvard with a JSTOR account. If all he possessed was 4 million journal articles, why did he need to go there to do it? Which was one of the points brought up in this article. And again, I don't know tech, so let me know if this is wrong in any way, but according to this, the steel rack stacked with routers and at least one server into which he had plugged the laptop in for download, which required an extraordinary amount of time, indicating that the content was high quality video and not documents. Because Aaron specifically had to go into that closet, it said that the targeted server could only be accessed via a dedicated line and not with a hack. A dedicated line indicates the transfer of illegal content to strong encryption. So in 2012, a motion to suppress was before the court, and the timeline is going to paint a very obvious picture to everybody. So on September 26, 2010, someone from JSTOR actually gets in contact with MIT about there being an excessive amount of downloads going on. They blocked the IP address and moved on with their lives. October 9th, the same thing happened again. JSTOR reached out to MIT. And again, it was the same computer that was being used before. Now, I don't know why, but they completely leave out this November 29th date. And on December 26th, there was another episode of excessive downloading that they didn't learn about until January 3rd, I'm assuming because everybody was on break. But then on January 4th at 8 a.m., MIT personnel located the netbook being used for the downloads and decided to leave it in place and institute a packet capture of the network traffic from the netbook, which was accomplished using the laptop of Dave Newman, MIT's senior network engineer. They connected it to the netbook and intercepted the communications coming to and from, meaning that MIT essentially hacked his book and took a picture of what was being downloaded. You can't do that. So within 3 hours of them discovering the computer, not including the time it took for them to call the guy, get into the network, get into his system, by 11 a.m., the Secret Service assumed control of the investigation. So the Secret Service didn't get involved until they found out what he was downloading. They then turned over that illegally obtained information to the Secret Service agent. Mind you, at this point, MIT is working as an agent of the government. So without a warrant or a subpoena or anything, they turned over all of this information dating back to 1214, and this was on the advice of MIT's general counsel. Mind you, Aaron was registered as a guest on the MIT network. He was allowed to be on the JSTOR network. All he did was violate user term agreements and downloaded too many articles too quickly. Other than his manifesto he wrote in 2008, they had no reason to believe he was going to upload it anywhere. And in fact, when he did the same thing in 2009 with Pacer documents, it was determined that no crime had been committed. And as a side note, it's weird that the FBI vault only contains information on that investigation. According to what MIT and the government claim was downloaded, it had nothing to do with any property of MIT. So by intercepting his communications, intercepting his workflow, it would not be a statutory exception, and basically all of the information that would have been found in that time would be poison fruit. All they would have had to do was just unplug the computer and problem solved. Instead, once the Secret Service got involved, that's when they set up a camera to try and catch Aaron so that they could identify him. And even after the discovery of the laptop, the secret agent, as well as Detective Murphy of the Cambridge Police, didn't even attempt to seek a warrant to intercept communications. My guess is because they didn't want a paper trail of what they were supposed to be looking for, so they could figure out after the fact what they could make a case for, to cover up what he actually stole that they couldn't disclose. He also physically broke into the hard drive, as well as fingerprinted this netbook without a warrant. Mind you, on January 6th, Aaron was spotted by the MIT police, and when they approached him, he apparently dropped his bike and fled. It's a little fuzzy here. But minutes later apprehended him, and when they searched him, his netbook was not on him. They actually found it at the student center, placed under a table. They again tried to access the computer without a warrant, but they were unsuccessful this time. Remember, that initial arrest was for breaking and entering, but there was no breaking and entering. He walked into an unmarked closet that was in the same hallway as a bunch of classrooms. There was no sign on the door that said he couldn't go in there. And MIT has a pretty open policy for people coming and going. So the probable cause to search him on the grounds that he was breaking and entering is shaky at best. Charges that were dropped by the prosecution later on because JSTOR asked them to. They had come to an agreement that Aaron just returned the journals that he had. In fact, I don't think they ever even got a search warrant for any of this stuff, because it wasn't until February 9th that there was an affidavit put in on applications for a warrant to search Swartz's home. What, 34 days later? Why would they need to search his home? They already had everything in their possession that was associated with the crime. Just because you're arrested for something isn't an open invitation for the authorities to search your home. It was after this that I guess he fired Marty Weinberg and hired 2 pro hoc vice attorneys from California. And they seem on the up and up from what I can tell from my research. Now, at the time of Aaron's arrest, he'd been in a several years long relationship with a woman named Quinn Norton. She was a journalist who specifically covered hacker culture, Anonymous, the Occupy movement, and she was an internet activist. Now, after the authorities seemingly illegally obtained 5 different hard drives of Aaron's, on March 3rd, his girlfriend was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. And honestly, it's unclear on what she testified about, because other than her credit card being used to initially buy the netbook the day before the first hack, what did she have to do with it? And Aaron seemed terrified that she would be prosecuted as well for something. And it seems pretty obvious to me that they broke up in order to protect her and her daughter. She signed a proffer and started cooperating with prosecution. But in a basically unheard of move by the organization, WikiLeaks actually quickly revealed that they were associated with Aaron Swartz just days after his death. There's a paper trail of Aaron FOIA requesting information about the arrest of whistleblower Chelsea Manning in December of 2010, which is not only the same day he was at MIT over that winter break downloading at MIT, corresponds to WikiLeaks confirming that Aaron was in communication with Julian Assange in 2010 and 2011. And unlike the media is portraying, the government was also refusing to hand over the metadata for the files in Discovery. My Karen Reed people know what I'm talking about. And the government was withholding all the copies of everything they seized from Aaron's searches, including the ones of his 5 personal hard drives. And in fact, they only wanted to give them access to these documents if it was inside of their offices. And 2 weeks before Aaron's death, they finally disclosed a voluminous amount of emails. And the day that Aaron died, the lawyer was going through all of these emails, finding powerful evidence saying they were really going to be able to go after these guys. So on the day that Aaron died, his new California lawyer actually filed a supplemental memorandum in support of the motion to suppress. 3 weeks earlier, Stephen Heyman had done a huge documents drop in which hundreds of emails between him and the Secret Service were finally turned over to the defense. It showed that Heyman was actually involved in the investigation before any arrests and was directing the Secret Service on what to do in the investigation. Not only that, there was an email that proved that they had lied in court documents where they had told the judge that the reason that they had not gotten a search warrant for any of the evidence for 34 days was because the Cambridge Police Department was in control of it. However, miraculously, after a December 14th, 2012 conference hearing, Heyman asked the judge to deny the motion to suppress the evidence without an evidentiary hearing. The judge disagreed, and they were set to have that evidentiary hearing on January 25th. Aaron died 2 weeks before that hearing. It was only after that status conference hearing was adjourned that suddenly they found all these emails. And these emails proved that not only was the Secret Service in control of these laptops, but it proved that Pickett was following Stephen Heyman's orders when he searched and seized the laptop without a warrant. On December 18th, as well as January 3rd, they were asking the court to let them file file a supplemental motion. Without giving any explanation for his actions, Heyman tried to say that this was an inaccurate way to describe what had happened and accused the defense of accusing him of prosecutorial misconduct, which is not what they said at all. And my Karen Reed people will know that this is very true to Massachusetts form. Heyman simply said, well, I just missed these emails the last time I was going through all the evidence to hand over to you. It wasn't intentional. Now, it should be noted that from the very beginning, the government was aware of Aaron Swartz unaliving thoughts, specifically because his very first lawyer had warned the government that his client was a risk. And how did Stephen Heyman react to that? He said, fine, we'll lock him up. Now, you think Stephen Heyman would be a little bit more sensitive to this information, considering this is not the first person that he prosecuted for cybercrimes that ended their own life. He prosecuted a 15-year-old boy named Jonathan James in Florida for hacking into NASA. And in that case, James was only sentenced to 7 months of house arrest. He ended up dropping dirty, so he did spend 6 months in an Alabama correctional facility. In 2008, the Secret Service had accused James of being a part of an identity theft ring. The Secret Service raided his house, his brother's house, his girlfriend's house, and they did not find any evidence. However, they did find a legally owned weapon that he would later use to unalive himself, along with notes and writing talking about how he had considered unaliving himself. After being found in his shower on May 18th, 2008 with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to his head, there was a note that said that he had nothing to do with TJX, and he was afraid that the justice system was going to try and pursue him even though he had committed no crime. Sounding a little familiar, isn't it? Because Aaron Swartz had also in his past indicated that he had self-harm thoughts. But here's the thing, when Aaron was having self-unaliving thoughts, he would document it on his blog. It seemed like a writing exercise to him, which is very common, which is why it was also hard to believe that he didn't leave a note. Now, both of the cases for Jonathan James was handled by Stephen Heyman. I think they were intentionally trying to drive him to unalive himself. I think it started out with surveillance and harassment. One of his friends, Alex Resnick, who was also named in court documents because one of the fingerprints off of the laptop couldn't exclude his friend, said that he and Aaron would regularly rent out a zip car and put all of their electronic devices outside of it. And they would sit in the car and talk with the radio turned up because Aaron was afraid that people were listening in. Alec even asked Aaron, do you think this is totally insane? And he gave me a bunch of reasons why it wasn't. Funny how they don't mention what those reasons are. According to his girlfriend Taryn, she said that he was intensely private till his last moments and that he wouldn't discuss the case with anyone other than his father, who was helping in the legal process. His father just so happened to be an intellectual property consultant at MIT's computer lab. Oh, but get this, Robert, Aaron's father, was very, very involved in the legal process, very smart, and was very hands-on with the lawyers. That is until the beginning of 2012, when Aaron's mother went into a routine operation and was put in a coma. So for half of the year, he had to step back and take care of his mother, which is why the timing feels really suspicious here for the federal prosecutors to add 9 superseding indictments. Because by March of 2012, all of the state charges had been dropped. They claim it was because they didn't want to impede the federal prosecution. However, a later report submitted to the president of MIT said that the Massachusetts state law required the district attorney to dismiss the charges after the Boston U.S. Attorney's Office and the Secret Service failed to hand over evidence to Swartz's attorneys. And just like what always seems to be the case with these people, their family ties tell us a lot about who they are. Because as it turns out, Stephen Heyman's father was Philip Heyman, the United States Deputy Attorney General under Bill Clinton. And if you notice here, he was in the office for less than a year. I've gone into one hell of a deep dive on my main page of the Clinton scandals in the early years. Just so happens that Philip Heyman was the Deputy Attorney General during Whitewater, Vince Foster's death, and Paula Jones. And if y'all know anything about the Vince Foster case, y'all know. He also was right-hand man to Archibald Cox during the Watergate scandal, where he was a special prosecutor. And ironically enough, he was a vocal dissenter when it came to George W. Bush's warrantless domestic spying program. Now remember this because it's going to come back into play in a video in the future, I promise. Now on the surface, Papa Heyman seemed like he had his morals in a row. After he left the State Department, he was hired by Harvard, which was a bit unusual considering he had no experience in education. And that's a little bit of a red flag for me, especially when you take into consideration that he was part of a secret society at Yale. Seriously, we gotta stop these familial lines in our government because they seem to be the biggest problems. But Stephen Heyman's not the only one with a questionable connection, because lead prosecutor Carmen Ortiz, well, her husband decided to tweet this incredibly insensitive statement 3 days after Aaron's death. And it just so happens that Tom Dolan was a corporate development executive for IBM. And you know who else worked for IBM? Frank Moss, who was the director of the MIT Media Lab at the time Aaron was arrested, who from 2007 to 2011 was a trustee for Princeton University, as well as served as the chairman for the Alumni Affairs Committee. And guess who used to be the president of Princeton University? William Bowen, who just so happens to be the guy who founded JSTOR. He also sat on the board that oversaw the Rockefeller Family Trust. You know, these Rockefellers. Frank Moss just didn't start his career at IBM. He started in the scientific center of the Star State, as well as teaching at the Star State's Institute of Technology. Which brings us back full circle to the blog about the child PDF file ring, where they implied that Frank Moss started out his career at the Defense Forces Cyber Warfare Research and Development Projects. All right, now that you've got a good handle on the background here, we can finally start digging into the claims in this blog. And trust me, folks, it's going to take me like another week of 10-minute videos to cover all this, because that's how deep this all goes. And I just know y'all have been anticipating what I found in the blog that Joy Ito sent to Jeffrey Epstein just months after Aaron's death. Now, the first person we need to talk about in this blog is Nicholas Negroponte, who was literally the guy who started MIT's Media Lab. Now, the writer basically accuses the one laptop per child initiative that Nicholas started was just a giant front for state-funded, 3-lettered child, an initiative that helped receive funding from the government thanks to his brother, John Negroponte, who was Deputy Secretary of State from 2007 to 2009 and the first ever Director of National Intelligence. Prior to that, he was the ambassador to Iraq, ambassador to the Philippines, ambassador to Mexico, the Deputy National Security Advisor, and was in a fraternity with one of the Bush brothers. But then in 2007, he stepped down as the Director of National Intelligence and served as Deputy Secretary of State under Condoleezza Rice, acting as Chief Operating Officer in the State Department and overseeing the formulation and conduct of U.S. foreign policy. Now, y'all remember a while ago when I identified Agent Ben Wolf as someone in Epstein's web? Well, he himself had posted a picture of when he was working for Condoleezza Rice as they were in a diplomatic mission to Iraq. Now, in 2006, Frank Moss took over the media labs at MIT, and Nicholas wanted to focus on his one laptop per child thing. And after it was exposed that the media lab had taken funding from Jeffrey Epstein 5 years after his conviction, Negroponte literally still said to his staff, "If you wind back the clock, I would still say take it." Well, clearly your Wikipedia page hasn't found the emails yet. Actually, there's a lot of emails between the two of them. It seems like Nicholas was showing him around the lab personally. Y'all were getting lunch together. Though it's funny because it seems like these introductions were not made until after Aaron Swartz's death. And I feel like when these men say the word philanthropy, it's a code word. I mean, Jeffrey was literally sending planes to go pick this guy up. Now, the journalist who wrote the article that this blog is referencing from 2003 to 2009 worked on and off again in Cambodia with an international team of anti-PDF file activists. The Cambodia team was following up a lead of material taken by the Newsweek Tokyo bureau chief Bernard Krischer, who's on display at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong, a den of connected with the Jimmy Savile case. There is an FBI tip in the files where someone said they saw Glenn Dubin, Leon Black were at this party together with this man Goobler, who was drinking red human fluids out of a necklace around his neck, and the entertainment for that night was Jimmy Savile. Now, Bernard Krischer was actually a Far East representative of the MIT Media Lab and collaborated with Nicholas Negroponte as one of the first to sponsor a school in Cambodia in Krischer's signature school building project. As it turns out, they also partnered with an orphanage in Cambodia called Future Light Orphanage, which housed 300 orphans. And there's a lot of literature linking orphanages in Cambodia and the prominent SA of children who were housed there. Now, the writer of this article references the Cambodian police shutting down an orphanage's satellite link tower, which was being used to upload child porn videos. And the teachers at that Cambodian orphanage told the writer of this article that the computers and satellite communication systems were installed and maintained by Nicholas Negroponte, also claiming that he was a frequent visitor at one of the orphanage's sponsors who arranged the weekend pajama parties in the city whenever foreign VIPs arrived. Now, I was able to find this text chain on Christmas Day 2016 with someone we can't see, where they write to Jeffrey, "We are in Cambodia. Hope you can teach them some good stuff." Mind you, the conversation started with "Merry Christmas to you and your family," to the number 2, a picture, then 2 more pictures. Then the original sender says Jeffrey style, to which Jeffrey replies, "Who are the girls and where? We can consider next semester at Berkeley, but you have working harder at delivering assistance. Blank will deliver you assistance in New York first week of January. We are in Germany with him now celebrating Christmas, birthday, and selecting assistance for you from his New York network, winky face." Then they talk about getting a special toy from my friends for Christmas. Did you have fun? Thanks for massage. This article also mentions the former British governor of Hong Kong, Chris Patten, as now widely suspected as a high-level protector of the BBC and his old boy circle. And oh boy, when I searched up Chris Patten's name in the files, I hit some pay dirt. Most notably being this email from 2004 from Ghislaine Maxwell's mother, talking about how her sister Isabel attended the boat race in Chris Patten's boat. Well, that's pretty damning. And let's not forget that Isabel was married to Al Seckel, who was helping Jeffrey scrub the internet and then mysteriously went missing, only to be declared a self-unaliving 7 years later. Patten shows up quite a bit, but in this one conversation, Steve Bannon asks Jeffrey if patent flipping is meaningful, and Jeffrey responds with, they all connected to Tom Barrack. And as we all know, Tom Barrack is all over these files. Now, in the article in its original form, and not just the blurbs we saw on the blog, they talk about how Krischer and his staff of the Cambodia Daily were hostile to their presence, the anti-trafficking organization they were part of. Now, apparently Krischer, under the guise of providing food relief in North Korea, he was actually visiting orphanages to select for children for overseas education. And at the same time, the Boys Town in Nebraska started having Chinese orphans show up. This group was trying to be boots on the ground, more proactive in fighting these brothels, like supplying equipment for nighttime stakeout. And at one point, when 2 of their team members tried to approach the orphanage that Krishner helped, they were blocked by Cambodian policemen wielding submachine guns. But in 2017, the Cambodia Daily's print publication was actually shut down by the Cambodian government in 2017. It relaunched its operations offshore as an online-only news service publication the following month. That's a hell of a quick turnaround. Interesting that they moved their operations to international water. A month after Joy Ito sent that blog to Jeffrey Epstein, he messages somebody who's blacked out, asking Thanksgiving, Christmas plans, and that person invites him to Cambodia for Thanksgiving. And just to wrap it all up, a month after that Thanksgiving Cambodia invite, Jean-Luc Brunel reaches out to Jeffrey, talking about how Ofer is with me and my friend Andre. Victor Hugo landed today from Brazil without a visa. We are going to Cambodia. Is anything that I can do to convince you for Tokyo? My guess is that he was referencing Andre Dunstetter, seen here in an email literally from the same day Joy Ito sent that blog to Jeffrey, helping him find a new governess to replace Maxwell. And considering Victor Hugo was the guy who wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables, I'm gonna guess that's somebody's code name. And even though this person was coming from Brazil without a visa, they're going to Cambodia for some reason. Sounds pretty shady, especially when you find out that the family is a star billionaire shipping magnate family. And Patriarch Sammy used to be considered the richest man in Star. He died in 2011, so clearly that's not him being talked about in that email. Meaning it's either his son Isle, who was an intelligence officer at one point in the Air Force, but I think the most likely culprit is Iden. Also because until 2023 he was on the executive board of Harvard Kennedy School. And I can't help but wonder if that's who's being hidden in these messages, talking about partying with the Princess of Cambodia in FemFon. You know, an activity that he called yummy. And no, we're not done going over this blog. We're not done going over my research, but I think it's pretty evident at this point that this blog has a lot of truth to it. And that's why it worried Joy Ito enough to send to Jeffrey.